Where do our rights come from? According to the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson said our rights came from God, or as he called it, our Creator. But was this just a rhetorical device by Jefferson? After all, if our rights come from God, then the government cannot take them away. But if our rights came from the government, then the government could take them away. So maybe Jefferson just attributed our rights to God in order to prevent anyone from arguing that the government would have the power to take our rights away. Maybe Jefferson just claimed our rights came from God, so he could argue against the statist position. Was Jefferson employing a rhetorical device, or did he really think that our rights came from God? Let's find out. There are three sources of our liberty. These three sources are found in both Christianity and in pre-Christian Anglo-Saxon culture. And these three sources of our liberty are, number one, government by consent. Number two, the law of the land. And three, property rights. Christians burned heretics. That's true. Christians did not favor free speech for many centuries. That's true. And during the Middle Ages, Christian leaders were as intolerant as radical Muslims are today. But Christian behavior in all those centuries does not prove or disprove Christian doctrine. Intolerant Christians who lived during the Middle Ages were not following the teachings of Jesus Christ, who taught tolerance. And because those intolerant Christian leaders failed to follow the teachings of Jesus, freedom of speech and freedom of religion would have to wait until the Enlightenment of the 18th century. Which brings us to foundation one of our liberties, government by consent. The social contract. This idea can be traced all the way back to the covenant that Moses got from God on Mount Sinai. It was even present throughout the Middle Ages in Europe in the feudal system. According to the colonial American preacher John Cotton, quote, all civil relations are based on a covenant. And number two, government by consent. Voting. Voting was not a Christian invention. Pre-Christian Danes and Anglo-Saxon had voting rights long before they heard about Jesus. But early church conventions decided controversial doctrinal issues based on voting among the bishops. And Christianity, especially the Protestant variety of Christianity, helped to support the principle that the government is only legitimate so long as the people agree to support it. The second foundation of our rights is the law of the land. The Chinese emperors, the Egyptian pharaohs, Japanese emperors, Persian emperors, and Mongol khans, they all thought they were God's representative on earth. They could make any laws they wanted to and take away any of your rights. But that's not true for the Anglo-Saxons. The earthly ruler in most of Western Europe, and especially in England and Norway, did not have the right to take away your freedom because the earthly ruler in those parts of Western Europe was not considered divine. He was not God's representative on earth. He was just an earthly ruler. He could not change the law of the land. That means he could not take away the rights that you were born with. Christianity also teaches a similar idea, that there is a permanent set of laws, God's laws, which man cannot change. King Saul and King David were not divine. The Hebrews separated earthly power from religious authority. The king was not the high priest. And Jesus did not establish any theocracy. He even said, my kingdom is not of this world. And in all four Gospels, Jesus tells us that the only part of the old Mosaic law we must follow are the 10 Commandments, nothing else. Those laws are permanent and not subject to change. Now, this brings us to foundation three, or the third source of our liberties, property rights. Anglo-Saxon culture honored property rights long before the Magna Carta or the Declaration of Independence. This was true for most of the barbarian tribes of Northern Europe, the Franks, the Danes, the Saxons, Angles, and Jutes. Property rights are, in fact, the oldest human right of all. We had property rights long before we had freedom of speech or voting. Property rights were the reason that civilization was ever started to begin with. According to the ancient Roman Cicero, the chief purpose for the establishment of states was that individual property rights might be secured. It is the peculiar function of the state to guarantee to every man the free and undisturbed control of his own property. Christianity and property rights. Christianity tries hard to prevent socialism, the forced redistribution of wealth. The Ten Commandments tells us to never envy the wealth that other people have. This teaching tends to prevent socialism. And Jesus clearly rejected the forced transfer of wealth. I refer you to Luke chapter 12, where, I'll quote the Bible here. A man approached Jesus and asked him, "Teacher, speak to my brother and tell him to share his inheritance with me." And Jesus said to the man, "Man, who made me a judge or divider among you?" And Jesus said to the others, "Take heed and be aware of envy, for a man's life consists not in the abundance of the things he possesses." True Christianity, as taught by Jesus, only calls for voluntary giving. Because charity is voluntary, it improves our souls. Socialism is not voluntary. Therefore, socialism does not improve our souls. People are not improving themselves merely by paying their taxes as required by law. In conclusion, it was a happy accident of history that both Judeo-Christianity and Anglo-Saxon culture both supported the three foundations of Western civilization: government by consent, the law of the land, and property rights. And America is the last refuge for all three of these foundations of human rights. Thanks for listening.